Thursday in Tryon, North Carolina, and it's going to be another gorgeous day. I mean, we've had back-to-back beautiful days. The only problem that we have is drought. We still have not had significant amount of rain, and the lake is down by at least 12 inches. We're just continuing to pray that those that have too much rain will be relieved from the flooding, and that God might send some selectively to us, not to add to their misery, but to give us a little bit of the greenery that we need. What they're forecasting for the leaves this year is that they will be spectacular in color, but that they will be short-lived because they're so dry. They'll fall off quickly after they change color. So the window of seeing the leaves this year may not be as long as the third week of November through the the third week of October through the second week of November. It may be just the first 2 weeks of November that we get the spectacular colors. We've been looking at Philippians, Paul's letter to the church at Philippi, and we just saw the glorious middle section of chapter 2, and now we come to a verse 12 that says, "So then." Well, so then is the same as therefore. So then wants you to go back and look and see, because of what was said before, why the conclusion is so then. If that makes any sense to you, I hope it does. But so then follows the words that God has given him a name above all names, that every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus is God, to the glory of God. So he says, after he says, so then, because Jesus has such a name, above every other name, and because every knee will bow and every tongue will confess, just as you have obeyed in my presence and much more in my absence, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Now, this passage of scripture has been a troublesome passage for a lot of people because they don't understand the working out of salvation, because we know that salvation is through grace, not by works. But this is not the fact that you get your salvation by works. This is now that you work in your salvation. Let me give you an example. Lois and I have been working for 2 weeks now on the area between the house and the lake. It was a sloping bank going down to the lake with underbrush, trees, and it wasn't real pretty. But we've been working on terracing it with beautiful walls, flower beds with rock borders, and we've been working in our salvation. Let me not say that that's anything to do with salvation, but the bank we already had, and your salvation you already have. But we worked with that bank to bring it to its full glorious state. And that's what we do when we work out our salvation. We work it out with fear and trembling. That is, we make our salvation all that it could be. And he goes on and makes that quite clear, because he says it is God who is at work in you. See, once you have your salvation, God is working in you for his good pleasure, to bring about his will for his good pleasure, to do the things without grumbling and disputing, so that you will prove yourselves to be blameless and innocent children of God, above reproach, in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation. Now let me say that again. So God is working in our salvation, the word of life. So in the day of Christ, I will have reason to glory because I did not run in vain. Paul says, if you'll do this, if you'll allow God to work in your salvation, and you live amongst this crooked and perverse world, and you keep your obedience to him, then he will rejoice in the day of Christ and glory in that day. Even though he has been poured out as a drink offering on behalf of us, he tells us that we should continue to serve and to allow God to work in the garden of our salvation, if you will, so that we can rejoice together. He says in verse 17, I rejoice and share my joy with you all. So he must have been a southerner. Verse 18, you too, I urge to rejoice in the same way. Share your joy with me. I tell you, I rejoice when I see some of the young men that came up under my ministry who are now serving as pastors and as ministers. And I rejoice with them that God is using them, has worked in the garden of their salvation, and they're serving him joyfully. And they're separating themselves from this crooked and perverse world. And this is Pastor Appreciation Month. So I hope that you will tell your pastor how much you love him, how much you appreciate him. He gives tireless hours for you. He serves many times late at night and early in the mornings. And so it would be wonderful if you would just share a word of encouragement with him, rejoicing in his service and rejoicing together that God's working in your garden of salvation and in his. Write him a note. You'd be surprised how many notes I've kept over the years because they were words of encouragement, words of love and appreciation. So write your pastor a note and tell him how much you love him, how much you appreciate him. I know that it'll mean a great deal to him. That's your thought for the day. Work in the garden of your salvation. You probably won't get as sore muscles as I did with Lois working on our garden, but you'll find that it's not easy working in the garden, even though it may not be tough on the muscles. It's sometimes tough on all of the relationships. God bless you. Have a great day.